Hey everyone, this is going to be kind of an interesting video. I'm really doing this as kind of like a time capsule because I want me on record saying this now and not 5 years from now. This video is going to serve two purposes. We're at the very end of 2019, which is also the end of the 20-teens. We're entering a whole new decade tomorrow. And I want to kind of go over like a bit of like a review of how different is life in this last decade than it was in the previous one. And then I want to kind of establish how I think it's going to be different over the next one. Like, how different is the very end of 2019 compared to the very beginning of 2010? On the surface, it's almost a little tricky because we're kind of like, we live every day of it, so we don't notice these rapid changes. And the changes I really want to go over are going to be technological. I don't want to go over political changes because I believe it's more of a pendulum effect. And culture is always changing, but I really want to go over how technology has changed our lives and technology of this last decade. And I want to be very clear about something. I don't want to go into detail of when something was invented. That's almost useless. I want to go over when some technology became prevalent in society. Many things I'm going to list, you could say, hey, that was invented in the 90s, but nobody had it in the 90s. It didn't become part of culture. It didn't change culture until this last decade. This last decade has actually been a very good one in terms of technology. By far the biggest change was the smartphone. The iPhone, I got one right here, actually came out in 2007. And you could really nail me and say that the original smartphone produced by IBM came out in 1992. However, these things did not become prevalent until really the 20-teens. Very few people had them, almost nobody had them in the 90s. A few people had Palm phones in the 2000s and the Palm Pilot, what's the other one, the BlackBerry. But they were never more than about 3 or 4% of the market, maybe 5%. If you worked in that circle, maybe you knew a lot of people had them, but very few people actually had them. The iPhone came out in 2007 at the tail end. It was a 2008 product. It was very expensive, and yes, people had them, but they weren't common. The 20-teens, they became common. Smartphones are everywhere. It's an expectation that you have a smartphone. And the smartphone changed a lot of things in society. Digital cameras. People generally don't buy digital cameras anymore because the smartphone is good enough. Now, enthusiasts still buy them, professionals still buy them, but most people still don't buy them. The taxi industry was greatly disrupted with ride sharing, Uber and Lyft. You could summon it on the phone. You would think taxis would have been in the prime place to do that. E-commerce, people were buying things online in the 90s and definitely in the 2000s, but in the 20-teens, it became very common. Amazon Prime became very popular. In the 20-teens, Amazon Prime is in more households than a landline telephone. Landline telephones have died this decade. When the iPhone first came out, people were very skeptical about it, and one big bad attitude that people had was that this technology, apparently like all technology, will only be in the hands of the wealthy, and regular people will never own it. And well, that didn't age very well. The smartphones of today are very prevalent because they solve so many things. Even the high-end Apple phones are $1,500. That may seem like a lot, but that's actually much cheaper than a 90s era camcorder or an old digital camera. Or if you look at all the things that they replaced, they're much cheaper than older technology. And you can say they're cheaper, they're more expensive than other phones on the market, which is true, but compared to the technology they replaced, the most expensive phone is very cheap. If you had to buy, if the year was 2000 and you had to buy a digital video camera, a computer that could edit digital video, a computer that could go on the internet, a computer that could do online shopping, all this stuff, it would have cost way, way more than $1,500. So the price drop is really important. And as I'm gonna get to later in this video, for many technologies, it's not necessarily when they're invented, it's when the price hits some certain threshold where people can actually go out and buy it that's important. In the 90s and the 2000s, there was ICQ, there was AIM, and now both of those are obsolete. Even Skype is not really what it was in the 2000s. They've gone to Facebook messaging, WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, and then just Apple Message and SMS. In the past, especially in the 2000s, if you wanted to do email, you needed a PC or laptop. If you wanted to watch YouTube videos, YouTube was around, you needed a computer. If you wanted to shop online, you needed a computer. All these things you needed a computer for have now become a phone. A lot of people in the country don't even own a computer anymore. They only have the phone. This does all their email, all of their pictures, everything. It's all on the phone. The GPS things, I remember back in the 2000s, people would have them in their car, a little like a TomTom. Google Maps came out on the phone, and those things are obsolete now. The other quick technology was tablets, iPads, comparable Android products and Samsung products. They've exploded with popularity. They went from the 2000s, nobody had one, and now here we are in the 2000 teens at the end, and they're very common. And prices have went down. In my notes, I want to look at other things which have drastically changed. One is the immaterial world. You know, the 2000s will really be remembered of the era of the DVDs. Some people had them in the late 90s, but very few. There was generally a 2000s era technology. They took off. DVDs were it killed VHS. And now DVD sales are drastically shrinking. I didn't purchase one DVD this entire decade. If I bought a video, I just bought the online, streaming version of it to watch. And internet streaming has really affected a lot of industries. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, now Disney Plus. They now make content that's exclusively to those groups, and it's drastically changing broadcast TV. A lot of young people don't watch regular TV; they just watch streaming. That's going to continue into the future. To get a little bit of a perspective, Netflix the stock price as of today versus December 31st, 2009 is worth about 38 times as much. So if you put $1,000 in Netflix stock 10 years ago, it'd be worth 38 grand today. That's how big these industries have exploded. Very few things have done that well, and many regular people did that. There's many people in this country who bought Netflix as part of their 401ks, their retirement, and their small investments, basically enable them to retire early. What we have seen is the death of the retail video rental business. Redbox, you can rent DVDs. Netflix, you can mail DVDs. It was basically died in the 2000s, but 2000 teens, we didn't have it. Blockbuster declared bankruptcy in 2010. Every decade, renting videos was part of life, and 2000 teens, it was not part of life. Unless you go to the Redbox, and Redboxes are at grocery stores, they're at 7-Elevens, they're at convenience stores. If you really look at marketing has drastically changed. TV ads revenues are way down. Magazine ad revenue is like tiny what it was. The big ad revenue now is Facebook, Google, and Instagram. And Instagram has created a culture of influencers. There are many small brands, hopefully mine included, which make use of people who have influence to market their products. So the days of having to get a magazine ad are still exist, but they're nowhere near what they were. Now what are people doing? They're paying Instagram influencers to push their products. So a lot of small little companies are starting, and the way they're finding their customers is by using people who have influence. A great example of this would be Instant Pot. That really cool pressure cooker. That was popularized through internet media. It was an Amazon product. They didn't manufacture it, but the company sold them through Amazon, and they used social media influencers to get that product popular. That's how products are spread now. So we've been going through a retail apocalypse affecting brick and mortar retail. It's not everywhere, and this is going to be conjecture on my part, but a major part is new brands don't sell in old malls. They sell online, and they sell with Instagram influencers. They sell on Amazon. Amazon basically replacing stores like Sears as your go-to anything you happen to need. But it's also in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Americans were building lots of shopping malls. We built a lot of shopping malls in this country, and you could almost say we built far too many. I believe America has the highest retail square footage per capita of anywhere in the world. So, one mall would open up and then another mall would open up and the first mall would be struggling. And while the 80s and 90s, especially the 80s, was known for the quintessential American mall, the 2000 teens is known as tearing down malls, abandoned malls, retail archaeology. It's drastically changed. A really cool technology that we've seen this decade that we didn't have, the advent of aerial drones. Now, drones existed in the commercial sphere. There were people who had them. There were hobbyists who had them, but it wasn't a $500 product. I mean, this cost me $500. I bought it a couple years ago. It has an HD camera on it, which is remarkable. HD video was very hard to come by and very expensive in the 2000s. It flies around. I could take photos with it. Fly with my phone. This is incredible. Like, this would have been science fiction 12 years ago. And now these are part of everyday life. You see them fly around, you see YouTubers make videos with them. We've accepted this as normal, but this is actually a very big deal. Now, a big part of this has been the drop of lithium-ion battery pricing. My data that I have with me, lithium-ion pricing is down 85% between 2010 and today. That's remarkable. Early in the decade, people thought, electric cars were not going to be feasible. No, to make them good, they're so expensive, nobody could afford them. The company Tesla came around and really turned that around. They were premium vehicles, but like many other premium vehicles they competed against, they were selling. But the price of battery storage dropped drastically and has every single year. And it went from $1,000 a kilowatt hour to $150 a kilowatt hour. And that's a very, very, big change. And if that continues, which I'm going to get to later, we're going to see some very different changes in the future. So the 2010s will be known as the decade where electric cars became a premium product. I live in California. Teslas are very common in California. Elsewhere in the world and elsewhere in the country, they're not so common. But the attitude was that there would be something that nobody could afford. Now the attitude that it's up there with a BMW or Audi, which people do afford because they do make those cars. If my data is correct, that Tesla has outsold Lincoln and Cadillac combined, and it may even be Lincoln, Buick, and Cadillac combined. This little company that thinks people think isn't doing anything is doing incredible work. It's outselling major American brands. And where I live, it has become the premier car to buy. If you're, the type of person who buys cars for that reason, in the 2000s, it was the Audi, it was the BMW, and now those Audi buyers and BMW buyers are Tesla buyers. This decade will be known as really the tipping point of renewable energy. People look at how little renewable energy makes. What they don't see is how cheap it's getting. If my data is correct, solar power is about 1/3 the price as it was 10 years ago, meaning the cost of doing one house today, or 3 houses today, was one house 10 years ago. And that price drop, sort of Swanson's law, and it's basically, to sum it up, solar drops in price 10 to 15% a year, every year. And it's advanced manufacturing techniques, it's increasing economies of scale, all these reasons why, but it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Similar to Moore's law with computers, why computers get better every year. And as solar gets cheaper, it eventually starts to displace traditional power supplies. And that's what we're going to see in the next decade. But in this decade, we've seen a lot. When I took my notes at 3 p.m. on December 31st here in California, renewable energy was making up 35% of the grid energy. I have seen periods where it's about 50%, and that's today. That's current, 50%. That's a very big deal. People think it's going to be, and that's peaking, that's peak hours, but people are thinking it's 1 to 2%, don't see the big picture of growth. And that's going to sneak up on them, and a lot of people are going to be disrupted by it. Interesting technology that came around. The human genome was first successfully sequenced in 1999. I remember I had a college professor who brought that up as it was the last great thing to happen in the 20th century, because his lecture was, it happened in December of 1999, so it was the last really cool technology thing to happen of the 20th century, the human genome. But what that's resulted today, 20 years later, is really affordable DNA testing. With 23andMe, you're seeing people where you can get your whole DNA tested. You can see your ancestry, who you're related to, genetic diseases. It only costs about $100. That was science fiction when I was a kid. I remember I even brought it up with the teacher that I said, eventually you'll be able to test your DNA and see who you're related to. And it was kind of like, no way, because that didn't exist back then. I mean, it kind of existed, but not like how it does now, where it'll tell you your exact ancestry, where your ancestors come from. And that's changing society. We're finding people are related to other people. We're finding people are mixed ethnicity. And another dead technology, compact fluorescent light bulbs, they're gone. They don't really sell them anymore. People aren't buying them. It's all new types of light bulbs. In this decade, we've seen the death spiral of the coal industry. The coal industry, my numbers are correct, is only about half the size as it was in 2009 or 2010, whenever you want to look. We've seen many businesses in the coal industry go bankrupt. We've seen more or less a constant shrinking of like 5 to 10% a year. I guess they've had a little bit of upswing. Despite the fact that we went from a president who was very opposed to coal, Obama, even though he did support clean coal, to Trump, who campaigned on coal industry, the coal industry is still dying. There hasn't been really any major new coal power plants built in the United States in several years now. There will not be any new major coal power plants built in the United States in the next decade. We have seen hydraulic fracking make natural gas more affordable, and natural gas is actually going to be very important over the next 10 years as it allows solar and wind to work, and when they don't work, you switch on the natural gas. So the natural gas infrastructure will be used, but it's going to be falling out of service. We have seen wearable technology come around. I don't have one, but the Apple Watch has gotten very popular. This company has gone in and disrupted the entire watch industry, which is quite remarkable. That you have a computer on your wrist that's more powerful than a personal computer was in the 2000s almost, definitely in the 90s. That's a big deal. Generally, I look back at this decade as being a decade of progress, and while I think it's easy to look back and people say, oh, life's not much different over the last 10 years due to technology, technology's actually changed a lot. But technology is really going to kick into high gear over the next 10 years. So I want to now base my predictions for what I think in the future. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I think I've got a pretty good understanding of a technological change. And I'm basing a lot of this on the work of Ray Kurzweil and Tony Seba. These guys are great. Listen to them over me. They're way smarter than I'll ever be. But I've often thought that you can take technology and double it every year. And while it doesn't seem like much, it builds up over a decade. So what's one technology that I think is going to completely take over the next 10 years? Solar power. And hear me out. Over the last 10 years, we've seen the price drop to a third. I think we're going to see something similar happen over the next 10 years. I think we're going to see solar roofing shingles based on what Tesla's doing, and we'll probably see other manufacturers make them as well. And people say, oh, well, solar power is so expensive, nobody can afford it. Well, that's not necessarily true, because homes aren't paid for up front. New homes are paid for with a 30-year mortgage. And while that solar power does add more onto the mortgage, it removes a power bill. And people are going to save money by buying solar, especially in places like California, where energy is very expensive and sunlight is prevalent pretty much all year long. Now, maybe you won't get all your power from solar, but the solar will power a lot of your power till you buy very little grid energy. So parts of the country that don't have a lot of solar would be the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, the northern latitudes. They're going to see a lot of growth. And it'll definitely have it in 2030, but we're going to see the real action happen in the Sun Belt. Basically California all the way to about South Carolina, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, all those states, Alabama. it's going to make economic sense. You're going to see a lot of it built. And I don't think this is going to be a political battle at all. While people on the left think that this is going to require massive political influence to build, and people on the right think it'll never happen. The reality is they're both very wrong. And the reality is it's going to be built because it's going to be the best way to generate electricity. And people who are looking at the bottom dollar are going to be prioritizing solar over anything else. Wind will be especially large, especially in the wind belt, which goes from Texas all the way up into North Dakota. If you live in one of those states, you probably are seeing a lot of wind power going in. Wind is definitely improving. Wind is going to be a big thing, but solar is going to be the real big one. Between the two of them, plus a third technology, we're going to see the end of fossil fuels for baseload energy and for terrestrial transportation, getting your car. So basically car power, grid power, the big coal power and most of natural gas is going to be disrupted and eliminated. I don't expect the coal industry as generating electricity to be around in 2030. If it is, it's going to be very small, very small. It's not even going to be 20% of what it is today. It's going to shrink. It's going to keep shrinking. Coal power plants are going to go bankrupt. Coal companies are going to go bankrupt. There'll be very few applications of coal in the future. It may still exist, but nothing like what it does today. The big next technology that I think is going to be very common is going to be home batteries and batteries for transportation. Now, the home battery is going to do a couple things for you. One, it's going to provide about, depending on what you get, it could provide anywhere from 4 hours to several days worth of battery storage. So if you have a power outage, you don't really have to deal with it. We saw in California massive power outages. I guarantee you those people are buying batteries. And the big thing is that batteries are getting cheaper every year. Remember I said they're down 85% over 10 years? If they keep dropping at that rate, they're eventually going to get so cheap where you can get 2-3 days of storage for $5,000-6,000. By the way, that will last you 30 years. You can use the batteries for decades and use them over and over again. What this is really going to do is it's going to now allow your home solar to charge your battery, so at nighttime you have power. And if you live in, say, the Midwest or the Great Plains or maybe even New England or the Pacific Northwest, you have more wind, your wind power will charge your battery. So let's say you have a battery at home that's good for 2 days without any input. Zero input is good for 2 days. You have home solar as an input and you have wind as an input to where, and you could also have grid as an input if you need it as a final backup. But the idea is going to be that these prices are going to drop really cheap to where you're going to do it. Now, it really doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, why would you buy batteries if you already have reliable grid energy? What you're going to see is that because of solar and wind becoming so popular, that there are going to be time of use where you can buy power at certain times of the day for way cheap. And that's going to be when we're blasted with sunlight or on a particularly windy day. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it to where you charge your battery during those periods and then you use it when it's not sunny or not windy, but you're going to pay way less. In certain parts of the country right now, the wholesale prices of wind energy goes to zero. And while consumers generally don't have access to that price, they might in the future. So you may find that your utility company sells you solar energy for very, very cheap, 20% the price that you're normally paying. Well, that makes sense to now have a home battery charge your day. Right now we have peaker plants, which are very expensive energy, and some markets have time of use where, if you run your dishwasher at 3 in the morning, it's very cheap, but if you run it, 3 in the afternoon, it's very expensive. What this would do is this would shift it all around where you charge your battery during the cheap times and use it during the expensive times. And then you also have your solar panels on your roof, which also keep you charged. So that's going to be a drastic change. And it's going to kill coal and it'll probably kill conventional nuclear. Nuclear power was something that I was very optimistic about 6 years ago. I thought it was going to take over. General 4 reactors are just going to proliferate like crazy. And we really haven't seen a lot of activity on that. Over the 2020s, I don't expect fleets of generation for nuclear power to go online. In fact, the only nuclear power in the United States that I think we will go online will be Vogel, I don't know how to pronounce it. Units 3 and 4, which have been under construction for nearly a decade, will go online in 2021 and 2022 if everything goes according to plan, which hasn't been good so far. It's gone way over budget. I don't think we're going to see any new nuclear power plants go online in the decade. However, we may see some success with Generation 4 development and prototypes and certification, but they probably won't go online this decade. If those products work, it's going to be something we're going to see in the 2030s, not the 2020s. So a major issue with electric vehicles that people have is the cost. Nobody can afford a Tesla. I mean, people can, but not everyone. We need everyone getting around in these cars. And that is where the big thing of the decade is going to be. I'm thoroughly convinced that over the next decade, definitely it's going to be done by 2030. I think it's going to be starting in the early 2020s. We're going to see a new way to get around that currently doesn't exist in the market. It does exist in test labs. And that is going to be a driverless car, which acts like an Uber, where you call it on your phone, you call up a ride, it shows up within a minute or two and takes you wherever you want to go. There'll be no driver behind the wheel. The car will be all electric because electricity is much cheaper than gasoline for miles. And it'll be on demand. You won't even bother owning it. And I predict that over the next decade, this is going to be the big thing. This will be, the smartphone was the big thing in the last decade. Self-driving cars, especially in taxis, are going to be the next big thing. And let's kind of look at this. In the year 2019, there has already been the case where Google Waymo has sent out a car with nobody in it, no safety drivers, no backup drivers, to go pick up passengers, pick them up, and drop them off. Now, the passengers are a closed group. It's special people. It's not just anyone. But it's already happened. That happened in 2019. We're talking about the past. Now, it hasn't happened on a wide, large scale. That's what we're going to see happen over the next decade. But there are many people who are convinced this technology can't happen. And I think those people are going to go from the attitude that this can't happen to it needs to be banned because it's going to be drastically affecting people. Driverless cars, especially as a service where you don't own it, you just call it for rides, it's going to save the average American household. Tony Seba's numbers are $5,000 a year, and I think it's probably going to be, for some people, a lot more than that because some people have to pay a lot for parking. Parking in cities gets very expensive. But from this, we're going to see drastic increase in income because if you're not paying for a car, insurance, maintenance, depreciation, payments, you're not paying for all those things. You're just paying for rides as you need them. It's going to drastically, you're going to have more money in your pocket for other things. So that's going to be, on one end we lose drivers' jobs, and on one end we have all this disruption for the car industry. On the other end, everyone has more money to spend everywhere else. So it's a growing economy, and they're going to spend those things on other services. But make no mistake, the driverless car will probably be the biggest technical thing, the biggest change in your life between now and 2030. If you're watching this video in 2030, you have ridden in a driverless car, and it's probably the premier way you get around. I think that gas cars, especially diesel cars, will probably be banned in many cities, especially downtown areas in 2030. This smell is awful, and the noise. You're going to see politics will change quite a bit, and I think this is going to probably be the biggest disruption of our lives so far. It's going to be bigger than the internet. It's going to put a lot of truck drivers, pretty much all truck drivers, out of work. There'll probably be very few, if any, working truck drivers in 2030. Now, maybe they're vehicle operators, or they manage multiple vehicles, but they're not driving trucks. This is going to kill new car sales. People are not going to be buying gas cars in a couple years, new ones. As people adopt this technology, they're not going to justify the expenses. I think a really good analogy would be the mechanical watch industry. Mechanical watches, spring-powered watches, where people have tell time. And then the quartz crystal was invented, and that's how people tell time. Now, there still is a mechanical watch industry where they make very expensive, sculptures on your wrist watches. But as far as regular timekeeping, it's not done mechanically anymore. It's all done electronically. With the electronics, it's way better. My prediction for 2030 is that a self-driving car ride will cost 10 to 20% the price of an Uber ride today. So if you think about it, if it costs you $10 to go to work, with Uber today, it'll cost you $1. And there's no driver to tip. There's no driver. It's just a car picks you up and takes you to work. And at those prices, nobody's going to even bother owning a car. And nobody is going to buy a car to pay to park it. Like hell, you pay a bunch of money to own this car, and then you drive it to wherever you need to go, and then pay $10 to park it when the ride there was $1. This is going to drastically transform cities. However, I think the big transformation of cities is going to be in the 2030s. I think it's kind of the reaction to it. We'll probably see many cities in the 2020s change to it, but this is going to be a huge deal. And it's kind of funny because I read skepticism on this, and you get it from the left and the right. The folks on the left, they don't want it. They want buses and trains and old technology, just a lot of it. And people on the right think this will never work, and this is just a pipe dream. And they're both going to be very, very wrong. Transportation as a service will be mass transit. It's going to be the best mass transit. It's going to serve inner cities, it's going to serve suburbs, it's going to serve long distance, it's going to serve the rural communities. This is what I'm most looking forward to over the next decade. And I hope I'm right. I hope 10 years from now I'm watching this video and I'm thinking, yes, I was right. Transportation as a service is taking over. But like there are still mechanical watch enthusiasts, there'll still be mechanical car enthusiasts. And I think car ownership will be a premium thing for people who want that, especially gas-powered cars. And it'll probably be more like a hobby or recreation versus, a serious way of getting around. But that ripple effect of driverless cars is going to profoundly change the world in ways that are very hard to think about right now. But cities of the future are going to look like the future because of driverless cars. Battery died on my camera. There's a couple batteries died, so I got to finish like this on the phone. So home batteries are going to be a big technology. Self-driving cars are going to be a big technology. Artificial intelligence is going to continue to, and automation are going to be absolutely massive. Alternative energy, solar and wind with battery storage are going to be the dominant sources of energy in 2030. In 2030, they're going to be big. Wireless internet is drastically going to change things over the next decade. We saw 4G come out last decade. Next decade, we're going to see 5G come out. We're going to see SpaceX's Starlink, and Jeff Bezos apparently has another one in the works. And what this is going to do is this is going to bring really high quality internet service to everyone in the world. It's going to bring internet to rural people all over the place. Pretty much anywhere on Earth is going to have access to really good internet service. And it's going to drastically change things. I don't think people are going to pay to have it go to their homes anymore. I think you're just going to do completely wireless. It'll be very common. The cable industries are probably going to be in a death spiral unless they drastically change their business model. But I don't think we're going to see people, new homes being built with TV cable lines fed to them in the 2020s. I think that it's going to be, cord cutting. It's shrinking at about 5% a year. I think it's going to accelerate. And I think by 2030, the idea of a cable guy will probably not exist, or it will be something completely different than what it is today. So a prediction I do want to make is that a calendar year in California, there'll be 200,000 gigawatt hours of electricity that come from solar power. That's on the order of currently how much we used a couple of years ago. I think it was 220,000. But this would basically make it to the total amount of solar power would equal what we used annually in the 2000s and in some years in the 2010s, or definitely very close. And it'll be cumulative over 1 year. I don't know what year. What that would require is that we multiply our power needs by, I think, by about 6 or 7. My pessimistic growth for solar power is it'll be 5 times as common as it is today. My kind of conservative, more likely scenario is that it's going to be 15 times as common. So think how much solar power there is today, multiply it by 15, and I think it's very reasonable to expect that. And my optimistic is that it's going to be 25 times as common as it is today, which in a state like California, if we get multiplied by 5, we're up there. But I really think we're going to see it. And that's not wind included, that's just solar power. But I do think by 2030, the state of California will pretty much exclusively get its power from solar and wind, with maybe natural gas backups and maybe buying some of it from outside the area during the 2020s. But I think by 2030, it'll more or less 95% of it will be domestically solar and wind. Another thing that I think is going to be a big thing over the next decade, we see a preview for it this decade with the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Meat product, is we're going to see something called cultured meat or precision fermentation really take off. And I think that the quality of the products are going to be much better. And this is actually based on Tony Seba's newest report, which really led me to, so to give you a little bit of backstory, I was a vegetarian vegan in 2003, 2006, and the imitation meats tasted like shit. They were terrible. I recently had the Beyond Meat in tacos, and I thought it was pretty good. Like, I had no complaints. It was a little pricey, but I realized it's technology. Technology gets cheaper. But I think we're going to see many new foods and many new products. I think we're going to see milk produced this way. I think we're going to see ground beef produced this way. I think we're going to see dog and cat food produced this way. I think we're going to have it to where you can actually buy dog food or cat food that has like mice and squirrel DNA in it. So they're eating stuff they would eat in the wild versus, salmon and beef. 8-pound cat is not going to eat a 2,000-pound cow. So how different will your life be in 2030 than it was in 2020? You're going to get around in a driverless car, unless you're an enthusiast, but it's going to be the most economical way to get around. It'll be how middle-class people get around, and probably how wealthy people get around too. You probably will have a solar roof if you have a home built after if you live in California and you live in a home built after tomorrow, it will have a solar-powered roof. I think you won't have solar panels bolted onto your existing roof. I think you're going to have a solar roof. Eating Beyond Meat, Impossible Meat will probably drastically improve. You're going to see downtowns without traditional cars in them. I think they're going to be prevented, and the reality is the air is going to be a lot cleaner if this works. And I think it's going to work, but I think it's going to be what actually cleans up air. You will probably have a battery in your home which stores electricity for you, and the reason why you have it is because it saves you money. Your home internet will probably not be wired into your house like it is today. It'll probably be either 5 or 6G, or SpaceX Starlink, or Amazon's equivalent. It's going to come from the outside. It's going to be drastically cheaper. Overall, I'm an optimist. I look forward to the next 10 years. I think it's going to be the best time to ever be a human, ever. Politics aside and small skirmishes aside, the 2020s will by far be the best decade. There'll be natural disasters. There'll be people who die of natural and unnatural causes. But ultimately, this will be the year to be alive, especially for the 7+ billion people on Earth. I don't know what the population is going to be. I don't know. I didn't follow those demographics. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked that video. I think what I said may seem a little far-fetched because it's going to be very different. The idea of driverless cars, solar everything, and I didn't quite go into detail about machine learning or artificial intelligence or nanotechnology. But tell me what your thoughts are going to be. How different do you think 2030 is going to be than today? Not 2050, not 100 years from now, but just the next 10 years, a very feasible amount of time. How different do you think life is going to be? Let me know in the comments below. So if you like the video, please like and subscribe. It's free. You can subscribe for free because it's YouTube. And let me know what you think.